Chapter 2, The Most Extraordinary Event of My Life. Through this program, students could choose how they wanted to spend their time in a particular country. The ship had organized trips you could purchase. They were expensive, but you got access to the most significant places. You could contact a local travel agent or tourist service, or you could just do an independent travel and go off on your own. Japan was the only country that I paid for these expensive trips through the ship. It was amazing, and it was well worth it. Tea ceremony with geishas, a traditional dinner at one of the finest hotels in Japan, Kabuki theater, the works. Then there was the Comparative Buddhist temples tour, where we traveled all over the area visiting different temples. It was the last day of this tour. The most extraordinary event of my life occurred. I have mentioned this electric shock feeling that I get sometimes when these strange events happen. I've had about a dozen of these electric shock moments. While each one is an important piece of the puzzle, I have ranked these electric shock events in order by level of high strangeness and significance to me personally. And what I'm about to share with you is the number one such event in my life. I have never spoken a single word about this until now. We had visited 4 to 5 temples on the first day, and we were at the first temple of the second day. There were 5 or 6 temples we planned to visit that day. However, while at the first temple, our tour guide somehow had connections and got our group permission to attend a very important Buddhist ceremony in another village pretty far away. We boarded our buses and left immediately for this rare honor that we had been invited to. On the long, hot, miserable bus ride there, we were told about the ceremony that we were headed to. They told us it was a ritual by a special group of Buddhist monks that are never seen by the public except during this ceremony. I can't remember how often this ceremony was held, but it seemed like it was once a year. It was at a Buddhist monastery in a small rural village. Only so many people were allowed to attend, but they had made an exception for our group. We were told this was a great honor and that we needed to be on our best behavior. I was excited, but some of the students were not happy that they had paid so much money, and now the last day of the trip was canceled to spend hours on this bus to go see some little village ceremony. I don't know how they felt afterwards, but I sure got my money's worth, and then some. After a few hours, we arrive in this town that is extremely different from anything that we'd seen in Japan. All the buildings were very modest and all made of the same material. They were all the same white stucco-like walls and natural wood roofs. It looked like the whole village was connected by these covered walkways with the same wooden roofs. There were pavilion areas, whole rooms with roofs but no walls or just one wall. Everything was with this white stucco or natural wood. There wasn't much color or decoration, which the Japanese culture is famous for. The roads are just dirt. It seemed like a middle to lower class village. The people were very plain as well compared to the style and traditions we had seen everywhere else. As we were walking towards this village, we noticed that there is a whole segment of the population from kids to the elderly that seemed like peasants. They were lined up along the street and alongside the temple, but I got the feeling they were not permitted to enter. If these people of this village looked plain by Japanese standards, these people made them look like wealthy elites. They were wearing dirty, tattered, torn clothes. They had dirt on their hands and faces. They looked like they had just been brought in from working the fields to stand outside this temple for the ceremony. The other villagers never acknowledged them or spoke to them. It was like they were invisible. After walking down the dirt road lined with these peasants, who are looking at us with such awe, we were let in the gate to the temple. We enter into one of the pavilion-type rooms. It has 2 open sides and 2 wooden walls. The shape of the roof is the most ornate thing about this temple. It seemed to be designed for acoustics. All wood. You could tell from the shape. To our right, there's a large, fairly plain statue of Buddha in front of the enclosed wall. People have placed burning incense in the holders set up around the statue, and some have placed flower necklaces around the statue's neck. There are wooden beams all over for holding the roof of the pavilion up. Behind us, one of the open walls leads into an open courtyard area with grass and trees. Again, no color, nothing fancy. As I look out into the courtyard, I see some of the peasant-type people lined up with their backs against the wall. They were mostly elderly. Everyone else is inside the pavilion room. There is a crowd of 200 or 300 people. We had arrived just in time, so we were in the back of this crowd. I would say that this crowd was 25 to 30 feet deep and stretched the entire length of this pavilion room. To the left was the entrance we had come in from through the street. Being very short, I couldn't see anything in front of me but the backs of the people's heads. Every now and then, someone would move the right way and I would catch a quick glimpse of what was in front of us. I saw a setup that was organized the way a red carpet event would be, minus the glamour. There was a carpeted entrance from the hallway leading to the wall that the Buddha statue was on. I can't remember the color. It may have even been red. There was a simple rope tied to plain wooden stands that separated the crowd from the ceremony area. The entrance carpet ran to the middle of the room where there was a much more decorated huge rug on the floor and a large tent made out of what looked like burlap sack material, but darker. The entrance flaps were closed. We stood around waiting for a while, and finally a few monks in very ornate gold and red robes wearing flower necklaces entered, and the crowd quieted. They walked over to one side of the tent and picked up some musical instruments and started playing a very traditional sounding song. Nothing Buddhist or monastic, just a pretty song. When they finally finished that song, a gong was hit, and they started playing another song. This one felt a bit more religious, but still, just a song. As they're playing the second song, all the monks dressed in these fancy red and gold robes with these colorful flower necklaces start filing in, and they don't stop coming. 2 in a row. Just keep coming and coming. There had to be over 100 of them. I lost count. They filed in and took their spots, forming a horseshoe around the tent in the center of the room. The first thing that struck me was that these monks looked too fancy to belong to this monastery, and there were too many of them. This monastery didn't seem big enough for this many monks. I was confused. But then the song ended. The gong was struck again. The monks with their instruments put their instruments away and went and took their places amongst the others. There was a brief silence, and you could hear the crowd shifting around. All of a sudden, I thought I heard a strange background noise. I couldn't place it because of all the shuffling, but I was trying to listen for it. There it is again. What is it? Where is it coming from? Then I hear a second noise layered on top of the first. It is different than the first, but somehow combines with the first sound to create 3 sounds at once, each sound individually and the combined sound. Is it an instrument? I'd never heard a sound like that before. Then another layer joins in, and now it is loud enough that you know these sounds are coming from a small number of these monks spread out in the group of many. Every 30 seconds or minute or so, another layer would chime in, and soon the entire building is vibrating with what has become the most elaborate, powerful chanting I've ever experienced in my life. You almost don't believe it's real. How can humans create this? It's more than just a sound or a vibration. You can feel the acoustic design of the roof. You can feel the sounds bouncing off just at the right places to combine into something that is just indescribable. I felt a change in myself. The vibration was so loud, you could not even think straight. It just snatched you up and started tuning you like a tuning fork. I could feel it working. I could feel my body's frequency or vibration, tuning into and aligning with this vibration. At first, I embraced it, thinking, wow, this is amazing. Relax and let it carry you up and away. But the layers just kept coming, and every time they introduced a new layer, it kicked things up a notch in the areas of vibration and energy. They just kept adding layer after layer. It was getting too intense, to be honest with you. I became frightened, and I wanted it to stop. I was just about to turn around and walk towards the open courtyard behind me when they just stopped. They didn't taper back down slowly. They went from this unbelievable intensity to silence, and you could hear the people gasping. I then knew that I was not the only one that had been moved by what had just happened. You could feel the energy in the room. You could almost see it. As I'm standing there trying to pull myself together, they hit the gong again. Some words are spoken, and then these little old monks in burlap sack-looking robes start filing in. There's only about 8 of them, but they were so old it took them forever to walk the carpet to the rug in the center of the room. I could tell instantly that these were the monks of this monastery. All of these other monks must be like the choir or something, just brought in for this event. They are filing in by rows of two, just like the others, but the first two are carrying a lantern in one hand and huge burning incense sticks in the other. They finally make it to the center of the rug and some ceremony ensues where each one is blessed with the incense, given a flower necklace, and then disappears into the burlap tent. The flaps are still shut. You can see nothing in the tent. The last one is blessed and goes into the tent. There's a couple of minutes of the crowd shuffling and then I hear a background noise again, and I know what is coming. Do I stay or do I turn around and walk out now? Can I handle it again? Towards the end, I was having trouble breathing and felt lightheaded, like I might pass out. Do I want to risk that? As much as my head was saying, walk away now, it's too intense. I couldn't make myself do it. I was drawn to it, like a spell or something. Then things got really weird. As the first couple of layers were introduced, I once again felt that shift in frequency or vibration within my body. But then the strangest sense came over me, and I knew the answers I had always known I would spend a lifetime in Japan searching for were right here in this very room, at this very moment. I somehow knew this beyond a doubt and was frantically scanning the room, trying to figure out, what is it? Where is it? I started to panic because I felt more and more that the answer I needed was in the burlap tent and no one was allowed in. I panicked because I somehow knew that once this chant ended, so would my higher frequency, and any chance of finding it was lost forever. I became convinced that whatever those old monks were doing in that tent was what I was looking for. There was only one way for me to get in there, but I was forbidden from doing that anymore. Wait, what? I suddenly had that electric shock feeling and a flashback. I recognized this flashback though. It was my great aunt's funeral when I was 2 or 3 years old. I see myself being held on my mother's hip. I keep trying to turn my head to look at this wooden box at the back of the room. I know that is what everyone is focused on. I can feel the same energy of sadness and confusion and fear that just makes me want to know what is in the box even more. I instinctively know that it's something important for me to see and that I have to find a way. I try the usual fussing and wiggling, trying to get her to put me down, but she won't. She is intentionally keeping this from me. She keeps turning me the other way so I can't see the box, and I'm getting very angry. The next vision I have is that infamous image that has remained in my head all these years. I'm floating about a foot above the box, and I'm looking at this woman inside. She is sleeping on white silk, but something's not right. She doesn't feel right. What is this? I'm hovering there so intent and studying this woman, trying to figure out what I'm seeing here, that I don't even notice a gentle woman float right beside me. It's not until she says, "What are you doing? Why have you left your body?" that I even notice her. I tell her telepathically that I knew how important whatever was in this box was for me to know, and that woman would not bring me over here to see it, so I just came out to see it on my own. I can see and feel her amusement at my childlike wonder and innocence about the whole thing. She says to me, "You can't do that in this experience. You must stay in your body, always." I'm horrified. It's like being told that you're going to be taped up in this dark box with 2 holes for eyes, and you have to spend your whole life in that box. I respond by saying, why? If I'm able to do this, and it helps me win the game, why shouldn't I use it? At this statement, she realizes that the soul inside this innocent child body is not so innocent and knows a few things. Her energy and demeanor instantly change. I can feel that she is irritated and losing her patience with me. She says in a not so gentle voice, "You agreed to abide by these rules of the game, not just the central rules, but the rules of each level. Each level has different consciousness, different abilities, different limitations, and different rules specific to that level. You must not leave your body throughout this entire process. The next time you do this, it will be your body in that box, and this experience will be over for you. Do you understand?" I really didn't, but I knew she was done with me and considering taking me back with her right then and there. I knew I didn't want that, so I said, yes. The next thing I know, I'm lifting my head off my mom's shoulders, where I was apparently asleep in her arm the whole time. I start crying. I'm scared. I don't understand. This flashback occurred to me in the blink of an eye, and just like the last time, It feels like I've been in a vacuum of some sort, and suddenly the sound comes back to full volume and I'm vibrating beyond what I feel safe and comfortable doing. Suddenly I realize that I cannot leave my body to go and see what they're doing in the tent. I am done panicking and I realize that the chant will be over soon. I don't know what else to do. I am going to fail at this one shot to get this answer. At the exact moment that I had resigned myself to the fact that this answer was going to get away from me, I felt a hand on my shoulder. At the exact moment the hand made contact with my shoulder, I felt a rush of energy. It felt like wind that originated from me and swept out about 3 feet in every direction around me. As this energy spread around me, all the people who had been packed up against me in this crowd took a few steps back from me. The air got instantly cooler. I was calm. I could breathe. I felt very stable. I turned to see who had put their hand on me, and it was one of the dirty peasant people, a little old man. He was wearing the same burlap sack robes as the monks in the tent, but it was dirty and torn. He had dirt on his face. He had this strange sparkle in his eyes, and he leaned in to whisper something into my ear. I bent down to meet my ear at his mouth, and he spoke some words in Japanese, just a phrase or a sentence. Even though I spoke some Japanese, I understood not a single word of what he said, but I knew that didn't matter. My subconscious had received this message, and it would be there and accessible by me when I needed it. As his hand broke contact with me, I once again felt that energy, a rushing wind sensation, but this time it was coming from a 3-foot circle created around me and moved into the center point, me. With that rushing energy, the vacuum feeling again. But this time, as the sounds came back to normal, all those people who had stepped away from me took 2 or 3 steps back towards me, where they had been before and never stopped watching the ceremony. It was like none of the people around me experienced this. How is this possible? Did I imagine this? As I look around expecting to see someone looking at me in disbelief, I realize no one saw this. I took a look around for the little old man and just catch a glimpse of his face as he's lost in the crowd. But here's the strangest part of this entire episode. When I caught that last glimpse of his face, he was smiling this familiar, knowing smile. Where have I seen that before? Then he winked at me. In the split second that he winked, it was my grandma's spirit inside that man's body. But as his eye opened back up from the wink, it was the old man again, and then he disappeared into the crowd. I started feeling very overwhelmed and exhausted. My legs felt like jello. I was worried that I would pass out. The back of my head felt all fuzzy. I knew that I had to get out of there and get some air. As I turned to walk out the back open wall to the courtyard area, there was this girl from the ship who was in our group. She had been standing there slightly behind me. Here she is frozen in this trance-like state, just staring at me. She leans in and says, "What did he say to you?" I shrugged my shoulders and pointed to the noise in the air, and then pointed to my ear and shook my head as if to say, "I don't know. It was too loud in here. I couldn't hear him." She gives me this look like she knows that I'm lying, but I can take no more at this point. I'm going down. My body is telling me to sit down now or you're going to fall down. I turned and made a beeline for one of the trees in the courtyard. I made it to the tree just as I collapsed onto the ground, but it looked like I had thrown myself down like that on purpose. I laid down on my back in the grass and tried to bring myself back down to a functioning level. After we left that temple, I fell asleep on the bus and I slept the whole way back to the ship. Here was the part that I couldn't figure out. When this occurred, my grandma was still alive and sitting in her home in the Midwest. I don't know what to think. Usually if something of this magnitude happens to you, you have some time to dwell on it, to try to remember the details. But on this voyage we were on, there was no time to reflect. It was classwork, and we will be arriving in China in 48 hours. Everyone had the mentality that this was the time for doing. There would be plenty of time to reflect on it when it was over. So I tucked that little gem away in a secret pouch in my brain and got back to the business of being a global explorer. A couple of weeks after this happened, I used the ship's phone to call my grandma. I wanted to ask her about this. Did she do that? How was she able to leave her body without getting into trouble or dying? However, there was a line to use that phone, and it was $7 a minute, and we had time limits. Also, There were many people in the room waiting their turn to use that phone. It was not a private enough setting to get into that. I did drop some hints just as feelers, though. I said to her I wished so much that she could be there with me, and her reply was, "I am with you, baby girl. I'm right there with you, experiencing the excitement and wonder of it all." I told her I loved her and that I would see her soon. When I finally arrived back home after this adventure, the first time we laid eyes on each other, she had that same shit-eating grin on her face and the same strange sparkle in her eyes for the first few seconds our eyes met. I knew that the moment I looked into her eyes, I would know for sure if she had any awareness of this. And she did. My whole family was there, so I couldn't speak to her about it, but I got almost a telepathic thought from her that we cannot talk about this, ever. It is just between us. Let it go. So I did. While this was the most significant experience I had on this ship, there were other experiences also. Looking back, I think the intensity and energy of a trip like that automatically puts you into a different state of being. The experience of being a part of this ship created an energy that was very conducive to the high strangeness events. It kept you outside the normal range of energy and vibration constantly. So the next incident of high strangeness to occur while on this trip happened late one night on the ship when I decided to head to the deck for some privacy and alone time. Privacy was non-existent on this ship. The closest you could get to alone time was in the shower, asleep, or to head to one of the decks in the middle of the night to stargaze and watch the ocean waves and the moonlight. I would often do this, go find a little out-of-the-way spot to be alone with my thoughts. There were 4 different decks at different levels. Usually I would head to the highest deck and gaze up to the stars that were so bright and vibrant in the middle of the dark ocean. But this particular night I chose the lowest deck, which was about 5 feet off the water's surface. I was just leaning over the rail staring off into nothing when a light caught the corner of my eye. I looked down thinking that someone must be shining a light out of their portal window. But then I remembered, the portals are above me, not below. I saw about 20 feet below the water's surface, lights that were rising and getting bigger and brighter. There was green, red, and yellow lights. It got to just below the surface, and I could see that it was a craft. Immediately I thought, okay, this is some kind of high-tech sub checking out our ship. But just then, a telepathic message came into my head. It was a man's voice that said, "You can run to the ends of the earth. Strand yourself in the middle of the ocean. We will always be able to find you." I then got a feeling of dread, of fear. I turned and ran back to my cabin, climbed into my top bunk, and cried myself to sleep. What is wrong with me? Why me? I am either completely fucked up in the head and need some serious help, or I am perceiving and tapping into things I am not supposed to be aware of, or the Bodhisattva theory is right on, and I have volunteered for this, and therefore are granted access to these things here and there, as it pertains to this game that I am playing. The last incident of high strangeness while on this trip occurred in the last country we visited, Morocco. I decided to travel with one of my friends from the ship. We were headed to this tiny little communal Berber village in the northern Rif Mountains. The town was called Chefchaouen. We had heard fantastic stories of this place being the major producer and exporter of hash to Spain. We had seen pictures and posters in the tourism office on the ship, but it was such a long journey. No one was headed there, and we didn't have enough time. We weren't going to let that stop us. We traveled day and night by any means of transportation you could think of. Train, rickshaw, cab, hitchhike. Finally, after 2 or 3 days of nonstop travel, we find ourselves in the little town at the base of the Rif Mountains. There is no more public transit to the town we are trying to get to up in those mountains. We talk to the locals and figure out that we're going to have to hire someone with a car to take us the rest of the way. No one wants to do it, even though we're offering a lot of money. Our contact keeps telling us that there are multiple military checkpoints along the way, and that people have problems at those checkpoints and no one is willing to take us. He tells us that it's dangerous and we should forget about it and head back. We're not even going to consider that. After everything we've gone through to get this far, no way. We tell him that he has to find someone who is willing to take us out now, as we are running out of time. We have a deadline that we have to make it back to the ship by, or it will leave without us. We're already not sure if we're going to make it back, as there is no reliable timetable for transportation in this area. It's not like we can say it will take the same amount of time to get back to the ship as it took us to get here. You just don't know. It's all up to chance, but we had gotten quite accustomed to gambling with chance on this trip. And we had come too far to turn back now. It just wasn't an option. He sees that we will not be deterred, and he makes a phone call. About 20 to 30 minutes later, this man pulls up in a nice car. He gets out and he's checking us out from head to toe. He looks like he doesn't trust us. He starts arguing with our contact in Arabic. They're yelling at each other, pointing at us, pointing to the mountains, and then finally the two men approach us. Our contact tells us that the man wants to see our passports and other identification, as those papers will be needed to get through the checkpoints. We oblige and produce all of our identification, as well as empty the contents of our backpacks and jacket pockets to prove that we have no weapons and mean this man no harm. Our contact tells us once again that the military checkpoints could be dangerous for us, and that this man cannot protect us and has no power if they decide to detain us. He informs us that this could be dangerous for our driver also, to take us here, and that his price has just gone up. He tells us that the man will require to see the entire amount that we've agreed upon up front, and to get half now and half when we get there. He says that if we are detained at any of the checkpoints, the man will keep the other half of payment, and we are on our own. We agree, give the driver half the payment, give our contact a nice tip for hooking us up, and jump into the back seat and take off into the mountains with this stranger. Ah, the tenacity of youth. It isn't until we take off driving that we realize that we have no way of communicating with this man. Neither of us speak a word of Arabic, and he speaks no English or Spanish. It was evening time when we took off, and we had been traveling for less than an hour when he pulled into a gas station. Through sign language or body gestures, he lets us know that we should use the restroom and purchase food or drink. He gasses up the car, and we head back out. We drive for another hour or two, playing with communication, and hit on the fact that this man and the girl I'm traveling with both speak a little bit of French. So that was the only basis for real communication, other than body gestures. The sun goes down, it's dark, and we're still driving. We get a little paranoid and wondering if this man was up to something evil or not. We took turns sleeping, as one of us needed to be alert at all times. In a while, we see lights up ahead. He slows the car and tells us this is the first checkpoint. He says to get our identification out, put our backpacks on the floor, and keep our hands where they can see them. We were not to speak unless we were asked a direct question. Let him do all the talking, and no sudden movements. We pull up to the guardhouse in the gate with a tall fence and barbed wire running along the top. 6 to 8 men with large guns pointed right at us are screaming in Arabic. They have surrounded the car and are shining lights into the vehicle. We look at each other like, oh shit. We now realize why our contact had such trouble finding someone willing to take us. This is crazy. One of the armed guards walks up to the driver's window. Our driver rolls down the window and starts speaking to the man calmly in Arabic. He gestures at us, gestures up ahead, and then sits there, looking at the armed guard who seems to be considering what our driver has just told him. Next thing we know, they open the door and drag him from the car as he's pleading with them, and we can hear the desperation in his voice. They open the back door and ask to see our passports. We see our driver standing off in the distance talking to a few of the armed guards. After a while, the tension calmed down. They brought us back our passports, and a few minutes later, our driver got back into the car without saying a word, and they led us through the checkpoint. It wasn't until the lights were completely out of sight behind us that any of us spoke a word. He told us that was the first of 3 checkpoints, but the next 2 shouldn't be so bad, as these guards would have let the other checkpoints know that we were searched and interrogated at the first. They would be expecting us at the next 2 checkpoints. The next 2 checkpoints were the same drill as the first, except they didn't drag the driver out of the car and didn't detain us as long as the first one. After clearing the 3rd checkpoint, our driver tells us that he doesn't know why they were letting us through. But we have made it past all the checkpoints and we will make it to our destination. It is around 1 or 2 in the morning when we make it to the village. He asks us where we want to be dropped off. We tell him that we need a hotel and are interested in the hashish that this town is known for. At the word hashish, he smiles and knows exactly why we've come here. says he knows just where to take us. He takes us to this hotel, and a young guy walks out to greet us. Our driver talks with the man for a while, and we get the feeling he is telling the guy all we've went through to make it there. The young guy walks up to us and says in broken English, "Ah, you want the hashish. You have come to the right place. Please come in. You are a special honored guest at my family's hotel. My family and I will take care of you. Please come in." We shake hands with our driver and bow to him. We thank him for keeping his word and delivering us here safely. We pay him the rest of his fee and a generous tip and say our goodbyes. We head into the hotel with our new host. As soon as we enter the hotel, there is a huge hookah sitting on the counter, and the whole room is filled with smoke. We each look at each other and smile. That driver did, in fact, know just where to bring us. He takes us up the stairs to our room, and there is a golf ball-sized ball of hash on each pillow. Like hotels in the West put mints on the pillow. We set our bags down in the room and follow him back downstairs to a living room type area. There are a handful of young people drinking tea and smoking hash, playing guitar, singing, etc. He introduces us to everyone and we join in the fun. Some of them are all wearing the traditional hooded Berber robe, others are dressed in Western attire, jeans and graphic tees. We tell them all the story of how we came to be there in the middle of the night like this. They are all mesmerized. Our host makes a phone call and we can tell that he's telling someone about us arriving here. Our host then says to us that his best friend's family is the largest producer of hashish in the area, and that his best friend is on his way over to meet us. A few minutes later, a young man comes walking in and introduces himself to us. We hit it off with these people instantly. I trusted them. I felt safe with them. It was like we had known them our whole life. We were best friends and had an extended family on the other side of the world within an hour or two of arriving. The friend, whose family was the hashish producer, disappeared for a little while and then came back around 4 a.m. He said his family had agreed to take us to their farm and give us a tour of the hashish farm. He suggested that we get a couple of hours sleep, that we would have to head out soon. We barely closed our eyes and we were up and ready at the crack of dawn. We spent the day at his family's farm. They were so good to us. His mother and grandmother went to a lot of trouble preparing a feast for all of us, which we ate Berber communal style, on the floor with these big bowls in the center of the rug that you just stuck your dirty hand in and grabbed a handful and put it in your mouth. They made the most amazing mint tea from the leaves they picked from growing in their garden. They let us play with all the baby farm animals and showed us the whole hashish making process. If we thought the golf ball-sized hash balls on our pillow were amazing, you should have seen the look on our faces when we were taken into the area of the field, which had something like the size of a pickup truck covered in tarps. They removed the tarps and we were looking at this hash ball the size of a pickup truck. They took us into the fields and showed us the plants, how they were picked and laid on these screens in the barn to dry. Then they were shaken to get the THC off the leaves. This THC powder they call keef. Some smoke it in that form. But the keef is processed and then made into hashish, which is really the most potent stuff. They export most of the hashish to Spain and explained that the family would pay off the authorities to look the other way. It wasn't technically legal, but was accepted in this area as hashish was the largest export moneymaker in the area. After an amazing day at the farm with this family, we didn't want to leave. We wanted to spend a few more weeks there, but we had just a few days to make it all the way back to the ship. We knew that we'd have to head out in the morning if we had any chance of making it to the ship. We still might not make it, but if we didn't leave first thing in the morning, there was no chance of making it. We really considered staying and just missing the ship. After all, it was the last country on the itinerary. It's not like we would miss another port, but the reality that we would lose all of our course credits and not completing the program was enough of a motivator to at least try. So we made it back to the hotel that evening and wanted to check out the rest of the town that we had come so far to see. We told the guys that we wanted to walk around town a little before dark and check it out, that we would be back later. We walked all over the town, through parks, through the narrow winding roads, into the little stores. It was so strange to see desert and palm trees, but also mountains and thick clouds. Everyone was in Berber robes and it looked like this town didn't get many visitors. We stood out everywhere we went. We would try to purchase things at the stores, but everyone kept refusing our money. They just kept giving us everything, saying it was a gift, that they were honored to have us visit. As it was starting to get dark, we entered the most famous Berber rug store in the village. We were ushered to sit in the corner, and several men started pulling out rugs and laying them on the floor in front of us. I started feeling strange. The back of my head got all fuzzy. I realized I had been here before. This has already happened. I remembered it. As a man carrying a tray of mint tea comes to the back of the room, he's speaking in Arabic. I start speaking in Arabic and saying what he is saying at the exact same time he says it. Everything starts spinning. I feel like I'm about to go down. The same feeling as when I was running to the open courtyard at the Buddhist monastery. I jump up and run out of the store. When I get outside, I know I have to sit down. I slid down along the wall and was just sitting outside the door. The girl I was traveling with comes out and asks me if I was okay. What happened in there? I told her I don't know. Some kind of weird deja vu. I just need to sit out here and get some fresh air. That I'll be back in a minute. She heads back in. After a few minutes, I went back in and purchased the rug that was pulled out at the moment that the weirdness started, and we went back to the hotel. We hung out for the night with our gracious host and said goodbye the next morning and headed for the ship. We made it by the skin of our teeth. We were late, but the ship hadn't left port yet. They let us back on board, and we were on our way back to the good old USA. Everyone aboard the ship was so jealous when we told them that we had managed to pull it off in Morocco. How luck and chance just carried us all the way there and set us on the doorstep of where we needed to be. It was nothing short of amazing. When the ship docked in New Orleans on Christmas Eve, most passengers had family there to pick them up. They were all too happy to get off the ship and get back to their families and their lives. My experience was the opposite of that. Not only was there no one there to greet me, but I didn't want the experience to end. I was so sad. I was one of the last people off the ship. I remember thinking that I don't fit into regular life. I'm not like everyone else. And this lifestyle suited me better than anything else had so far. To just be a permanent tourist, whisked off from one amazing experience to the next. Then there was the fact that all these incidents of high strangeness were instigated by the shift in energy and from being removed from my norms. I didn't want to go back to my norms. I wanted to continue like this forever. I can honestly say this experience was the best time of my life. I've never felt more at home, comfortable, and doing what I'm supposed to be doing than when I was on that ship. When this experience is over for me and they ask me what I liked best about it, hands down, it is this 3-month period of my life that was worth more than all the rest of it combined. I am forever grateful to have been chosen to experience that. Wow, that experience alone makes all this crazy dark shit worth it. I can't even put into words the state of being, the feeling that you are finally working with and not against your destiny. I made it home by New Year's Eve and decided that I needed to take a semester off. I needed some time to process all that I had experienced. There was no way I was able to start a new semester of school in 2 weeks.